are back again with On the Margins. And my name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain. And we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about what's kind of living rent-free in everybody's minds for 2024. But then also, we're going to get out our crystal balls and talk about the predictions for 2025 with not only MVK, but with Dean as well. MVK, thank you for being my sidekick, my co-host. Welcome back. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back, Sarah. Always a pleasure. I'm just going to call myself your wingman from now on. But it's always a pleasure to be here. My name is Michael van Keulen, or I go by MVK. I am the Chief Procurement Officer here at Koopa. And today I'm actually coming live at you from Dubai. So yeah, it's great. It's good to be here.
And every time it's a different city, different country. I love it. I think I'm your wingman. Honestly, I don't think it's the other way around. I'm kind of your wingman in all of this.
Maybe I'm gonna call myself Waldo. How does that sound? You know, where's Waldo?
Where's Waldo? But then you have to start wearing the like red and white stripes and you're going to have to take pictures and post them to LinkedIn. And then we can use that to be like, where's MVK today?
Yeah, fair enough. All right, fair. Well, let's get into it. I look forward to the discussion. I look forward to seeing Dean as well. So let's go.
I know we've got so much to talk about. Now, so much has happened in 2024. So we want to talk a little bit about some of those hot takes, some of the things that we've been talking to, leaders about. I know that I've got a couple of priorities that have been top of mind in a lot of conversations that I've been having as well. We kind of want to talk about what's living rent-free, I think as the kids say, in our heads, their heads, leaders' heads for the past year. So what do you think those are? I've got a couple, but I'll get you to share yours first.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we've just gone through some elections here and there, also in the US. We're not, of course, here to talk about politics, but what is interesting is to just talk about what's going on in the macro. And, there's now talk about, what's the leading currency in the world and what are, for example, Brazil and some of the other bigger economies going to do with regards to what the leading currency is. And there's already conversations happening around what that does to import duties and import taxes. And you'll see this, like, if you look at the macro out there, this is just one example, but it's happening everywhere. In Europe, there's lots of unrest. In France, and there's stuff happening in England. And of course, we still have all the tragedies that are happening in the Ukraine. And you see things in the region that I'm actually in today. And there's just so much, uncertainty as we move into 2025. I think that talking about supply chain, and we're going to talk about that shortly, thinking about optionality in your supply chain, I think is going to be more critical than ever. We don't know where it's coming from. We don't know, when it's happening. But what we can certainly do is start to project and lose the power of technology. And we'll get to that with Dean, is to think about, like, what are some of my optionalities and what are the what if scenarios that I need to start to think about as it comes to the design of my supply chain, and bring that to the business, and so that we go into 2025 with open eyes and open ears rather than just waiting for stuff to happen to us. I think that would be one of the big ones for me.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought that up because I was going to talk about risk. I think risk has been on the top of minds for everybody in 2024, how to manage it, how to mitigate it. What does that look like? I think one of the themes that I've been seeing as well is that no decision is ever necessarily perfect. And we've got to kind of stop thinking that way. We kind of have to start thinking about the decisions that we're making with the data that we have in the moment and the processes that we have in the moment and what's happening with the organization in the moment. That's the right decision for today, right? Maybe tomorrow, maybe a month from now, but things are changing so quickly that we need to give ourselves a little bit of grace when we're thinking about, the perfect decision, or let's think about it more as the right decision. And I think some of the things around, mitigating risk in supply chain, in procurement, diversification has been top of mind, embracing technology like you were talking about, building buffers, creating partners instead of suppliers, preparing for chaos with a smile. I mean, listen, we are supply chain professionals and problem solving is kind of like our middle name. So we kind of thrive in these environments, but at the same time, we don't want to burn out. We want to give ourselves a little bit of grace.
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, it's always the old saying of like expect, anticipate the worst and hope for the best, or but it's kind of like, we have to do this. We have to get out. We have to engage with our suppliers. It's exactly what you said, Sarah, and make decisions based upon the data that you have at your fingertips today. Think about optionality for sure, but also make decisions. Don't sit back and wait for stuff to just happen, because once you're in reaction mode, we know from the recent past, but also just if you look back at the 25 years that I've been doing it, is if you sit back and wait for stuff to happen, you're typically going to make the wrong decision. 100%.
Yeah, it's so true. And then obviously you can't talk about 2024 without talking about AI. And I just want to talk a little bit about the adoption of AI, because I'm not sure if we've necessarily seen adoption. We've actually seen a growth in interest and people talking about it and using it in a variety of different ways. But remember, everybody needs to lay that foundation first before we can get into the adoption of AI. And I think we still have a ways to go on that.
For
What do you
sure.
think about that?
But
Yeah.
as we said last time, we have to get started.
Yeah.
Right? We have to get going. We can't just, again, also there wait for, this really big AI goal and just look at this as a mountain. Just get started with something small, test it out. It can be in your contracting process, in your sourcing process. It can be further downstream in your rec to PO, invoice matching, detecting fraud. But you have to get started.
So many ways. All right. Well, with that said, now it's time to bring up our guest for today. So welcome, Dean. How are you?
Hey, Sarah. Great to see you again.
It's good to see you too. I'm excited because we're going to ask you to get out your crystal ball and talk a little bit about predictions. Are you ready for that?
Let's do it.
All right. So for anybody who doesn't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your career, what you do at Koopa, how you ended up in supply chain, maybe. Give us the whole story.
Oh, wow. Okay. How long do we have?
You've got 2 minutes.
I'll
2
keep
minutes
it
exactly.
brief. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So, yeah, I mean, my journey into supply chain was quite interesting. I definitely say it couldn't have been predicted. All my academic life, I grappled between a passion for engineering, a passion for computer science. And as I made my way into the workforce, I found myself in logistics and supply chain. And while that was very fruitful in my career, it wasn't satisfying enough. And I found a pivot point where I kind of reflected on my skill sets, reflected on everything I'd learned over the years, and harnessed those to combine them to say, okay, what can I do with this? And that's where I found supply chain software. I found the ability to combine my passion for solving complex problems with IT and computing and bringing that together. And it kind of started my journey a couple decades ago into supply chain software. And here I am now, 1 year later. I've been at Koopa and enjoying every minute of it every day.
No, that's great. And so, Dean, one of the things that absolutely I'm even super interested in, but I'm sure all of our listeners, of course, you've got tons of experience. You've now been in for a year. You just said it yourselves. You've been in supply chain for a couple of decades by now. But given your experience, what is different about Koopa and what drove you to join this incredible village that we have?
Yeah, no, MBK. I mean, look, I've followed Coupa. I mean, I follow many software companies as I find a passion for it and understanding what they're doing to bring unique capabilities to market. But truly, what intrigued me was the point about 4 years ago when Coupa acquired LlamaSoft, and I'd followed LlamaSoft for many years and had lots of friends, former colleagues, and others that had worked there. And understanding Coupa and its journey to take the power of community data and harness what is now a $7 trillion data set, and to really use that and power that with AI to bring differentiated capabilities to the market is ultimately what intrigued me. And when Coupa started their journey a few years back into the direct procurement space and looking at how do we bridge direct procurement with supply chain, how do we bridge finance decisions with supply chain KPIs, that's when it got really interesting. And that's when, fortunately, about a year ago, as you said, I had an opportunity to explore that, and it was a no-brainer for me, and here I am.
Well, and it kind of brings everybody together, right? Doesn't it? Doesn't KPIs bring everybody together? Isn't that kind
Certainly
of the
does,
thing?
yeah.
Right? We want to bring procurement and supply chain leaders together internally. And what better way to do that than with KPIs? I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you've talked to a lot of leaders. You've had a lot of conversations over the past year. What are some, like MVK and I at the top of the show shared some of what we've been hearing from leaders. What are some of the things or the key things that maybe you've noticed supply chain leaders that are struggling with this past year? Like what's kind of top of mind for them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of them will come as a surprise. As we think about it, businesses, manufacturers, distributors, you name it, have been dealing with a tremendous amount of uncertainty in their supply chains, from tariffs to trade to wars to delays and strikes and everything else in between. The sheer amount of volume and influx of disruption that impacts a business today is just completely overwhelming and somewhat completely unmanageable. And so we're seeing that, businesses are still struggling with this. They're still struggling with how do they harness the data they have, the processes they have in place, and how do they leverage technology to kind of get ahead of this. The second piece is around governance, right? Especially as we talk about KPIs, Sarah, we've put a lot of processes in place in our business, and what we've done is inherently we've created redundancies. We've put so many measures in place across multiple silos of our business, from sales and finance and manufacturing and supply chain itself. But often what we're seeing is these KPIs, these measures, these goals are disjointed, and as we move the needle in one, we end up negatively moving the needle in another. And we've yet to bring that together and truly understand how to find that balance. And then the last piece, I think it's no surprise, is around sustainability. 2023, we saw numerous new laws go into effect across Europe, from their corporate sustainability due diligence directive to California's climate disclosure legislation. Companies are truly struggling to grapple this. They're struggling to understand how they put the right processes in place, how they fine-tune their supply chains, but it's not just their supply chains. I mean, if you look at the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, it's going now down into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, nth tier parts of the supply chain. And so how, as a corporation, do you control that? Do you measure that? Do you understand the impact that has on your total footprint?
Well, and while we're talking about this, one of the big things that I've been hearing recently is time. Senior leaders are tied up in meetings, back-to-back meetings for almost 12 to 14 hours, which doesn't really give them a lot of time to be able to be strategic, have the conversations they need to have, do any of the work that they're supposed to be doing that comes from some of those meetings as well. And I think that has also, and it's interesting that you talk about all of these mandates that are coming in that are going to take time to implement, which they don't necessarily have because they're in meetings all day. Yeah. And so I think we have to strike a better balance as well into the time that senior leaders have to be able to mitigate some of these disruptions that you're talking about.
No, absolutely. You're spot on there, Sarah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, and this was pre-pandemic, but there was a study done, I believe it was McKinsey, that showed that CEOs only spend 1% of their time with suppliers. You should just think about it. 1% of their time for a chief executive officer to spend with their supply chain and their suppliers. I think that number has definitely gone up. I haven't seen a recent study. I'd be surprised if it's not higher than 1%, hopefully, but it's still not a big percentage. And if you think about it, like, of course, that is where all your innovation happens. That's where all your continuity happens. And because, to your point, Sarah, they're often bogged down in meetings and board meetings and strat planning and not so much about thinking about their supply chain. So Dean, I mean, of course, one of the things that I definitely want to ask as a chief procurement officer, if you will, to a supply chain leader like yourselves is, historically I've always had a really good connection because supply chain, of course, leads to the demand and demand drives ultimately sourcing. And so having that connectivity is super, super critical. I unfortunately know that's not always the case. So the question that I want to ask you is, what is one of those things that is, and you kind of talked about some of these things already earlier, but what is the one thing that you think is often overlooked in supply chain that people should focus on more as we enter into 2025?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one there, MVK, as we think about it, right? I'll go back to kind of the notion of governance as we think about the disparity in the data that we've created, as we think about the silos that we've created in departments. What we're seeing, some of our leading customers, leading organizations are starting to bring together, in some cases referred to as centers of excellence, but bringing together teams that are cross-functional, that understand all the levers that can be pulled, but understand all the impacts that it has across all the different departments of the organization, and bringing that together to create tool sets, harness the power of software and technology, and ultimately create process that finds greater balance for the business, right? As we think about the governance that's been put in place, as we think about all the measures we have, and we talk about KPIs here and kind of joke about it.
Sorry, I had to.
It's not just KPIs anymore, it's balance, right? And so it's how do we find that balance? How do we bring that together? How do we get a single lens into the truth, right? That's really the struggle, is having one single piece of glass that allows us to see the business end to end and understand where those trade-offs sit.
Yeah, and I really like that, and I'm sorry, Sarah, I really like that. I mean, you could have a metric that says, hey, my on-time delivery is 99.5% or whatever the number is, like really high. But what you might not be looking at is how much risk am I putting into my supply chain, or maybe working capital, or maybe continuity challenges that you might introduce into your supply chain. So I like how you're thinking about KPIs. Yes, we love KPIs. I'm a finance guy, forever recovering, as I always have to remind everyone. But at the same time, you also want to think about it more from a balance and say, hey, maybe my on-time delivery can come down, but as a trade-off, I'm actually de-risking my supply chain, for example. And of course, you can talk about these metrics, and that can be a whole different session. But I like that.
Yeah, I mean, if I dive into that a little bit deeper, right? I mean, it's the trade-offs across the business, as I said, right? So as we think about, you talk about time to delivery, if you talk about on time and full measures, a lot of times we're taking decisions that help influence, let's say, margin or help influence top line revenue, but yet we don't consider what is the impact on the supply chain as a whole and how it's measured. And so as we think about this, we take decisions, we run promotions, we increase or decrease inventory across the various nodes of our networks to meet that demand, but it has a knock-on effect. And so how do we truly look at that and understand what that knock-on effect is?
Well, and I think as support for leaders, you talk about that center of excellence and having people from across the organization come together to be able to help mitigate risk, come to some decisions. When we talk about senior leaders in supply chain not necessarily having a lot of time, if we create a support system around that for the leaders in supply chain, things are actually going to happen a lot quicker, a lot easier, in a collaborative fashion, without that sort of clunkiness that we want to take out of it because we're making decisions in silos. And now this is my favorite part of the conversation, because I'm going to ask you to get out a crystal ball. And I wish we had one, because I think it would be fun to actually produce one and be like, hey, crystal ball. No, but what do you think your predictions or maybe even expectations for 2025 are? Like, what should we be looking out for? I know for me, there's that time piece that I was talking about. How do we create more support? How do we reduce burnout? I think cybersecurity needs to be more top of mind for supply chains, but I'd like to hear from you what your predictions and expectations are.
Yeah, I certainly don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not a futurist, but I'll try my best. As we think about this conversation, we think about the data we've created over the last 10 years, right? I mean, we've gone through a couple different revolutions, if you will, in the last 10, 20 years has been an IT data revolution where we have more data than we know what to do with. And we still struggle to harness that, right? I mean, over the last 5+ years, corporations have been putting in data lakes to harness and centralize this data and understand how they can bring disparate data together and understand what it means to them and how they can leverage that to take decisions. If we look at companies across supply chain, we typically have fragmented systems across demand, supply, finance, distribution, you name it, right? And as well as the ERP on top of it. And so as we turn to 2025, and I think you both opened up with this, right? But AI has been something we've been watching. I think we've started to see it really mature faster than we could ever imagine. And I can confidently say, like, generative AI and the power of AI is absolutely real. And 2025, I believe, is the year that we start to truly harness that. As we think about the data that we're sitting on now, that's in most cases sitting in some type of data lake, AI is going to give us the power to really probe this data without having to rely on massive amounts of people and time, as you talk about, Sarah, to figure out how to bring it back together. AI is going to do that for us, right? We're going to be able to simply ask AI to help us understand what trade-offs are being made in the business, what the impacts are in the business, what the KPIs look like if we take decisions in the business. And this ability to kind of probe data to analyze different scenarios is going to give us so much power in how we look forward into the future of our business and take smarter decisions. And we talk about the challenges we faced in 2024 across sustainability and governance and others, and those aren't going away. Those are only going to get harder and harder, and we're going to see more regulations and more challenges. And I think businesses especially are going to be looking in 2025 to leverage supply chain to cut costs. They're going to be truly under pressure to drive 10, 20, 30% efficiencies in their supply chains. And we're only going to get that if we harness the power of AI and this data that we're sitting on.
Yeah, 100%. And so then the obvious question is, with regards to, what you just described is, what is Koopa doing to address these challenges and opportunities? And maybe you can talk a little bit about what the roadmap is going to look like.
Yeah, I can briefly touch on the roadmap for sure. The journey we're on right now is what we call the adaptive supply chain. And it's really about helping companies be more integrated, anti-fragile, and optimized for efficiency. As I talked about some of the advanced planning systems and capabilities, like these systems are really great for solving for immediate disruptions, immediate supply challenges, demand fluctuations, but they fall short today when we think about the strategic decision making that we have to do across various time horizons. Maybe I'll talk on one of the roadmap items that we're launching is what we call integrated scenario planning. And so that's this single lens into the supply chain, kind of talking about solving for what I talked about earlier. And what it is at a high level, ISP, as we call it for short, integrated supply planning or scenario planning, is an AI supported optimization engine. It enables chief financial officers, chief supply chain officers with detailed scenario modeling. It's all inclusive of all the variables across the supply chain, all the data across the supply chain. But I think more importantly, when we talk about breaking down the silos, having more balanced decision making, where we see ISP going is the ability to bridge supply chain KPIs with financial objectives and empower the executives to make those intelligent trade-off decisions. And so ultimately we're trying to bring all this data together, right? It's already in one place. Now, how do we bring it together? How do we power it with AI? How do we create a single lens into the data? And how do we probe it with questions through generative AI rather than relying on a tremendous sized workforce and data scientists to help us build reports and dashboards and metrics and other optimization and formulations to get the answer. So that's probably the most exciting thing that I'm most excited about here for MVK. I truly think we're at a really critical pivot point in supply chain management, I feel like. In business as a whole, I think AI is absolutely that next revolution. So how do we start harnessing it? How do we start using it tomorrow? And how do we find the trust in it? And I think, Sarah, you talked about data and security and such. That's obviously critical as we think about AI. And one of the areas that we focus the most on is ensuring that as we build AI, we do that in a responsible way, and that we're doing it in a way that our customers understand that it's not a black box decision. It is truly a glass box decision, and that we can have trust in what the machine is coming back with.
Trust is so important. And I love what you're talking about. I mean, I started this off saying that adoption around AI has been a little bit murky through 2024. You're saying in 2025, if you're not adopting it, you need to adopt it. It's coming really quickly. I think one of the things while you were talking also is how we process information. That also is overwhelming to supply chain professionals, procurement professionals, leaders, senior leaders. There's so much information coming. How do we process that quicker and easier? And so I almost feel like that's also a place to start. The data is one thing, but also information that's coming from different places to be able to process that a lot easier and faster as well. So, AI is here. People need to adopt it, but adopt it in a way that makes sense for them, I think, also is the key point there.
Yeah.
Now, if we talk about supply chain or adaptive supply chains and building an adaptive supply chain, what's one thing that you think supply chain executives can start right now on that journey?
Oh, goodness. You really put me on the spot there. Look, I mean,
I try to do that.
I know, and I appreciate that you do. Look, I have to say, I mean, we've got to break down the silos. We've got to start looking at our business holistically. This isn't at the CEO level, right? This is about bringing every layer of management, every layer of decision making together on a single page, and ensuring that we understand the trade-offs. And it's like a manufacturing process. I mean, if we don't understand what goes in and what comes out and what the process is in the middle, we never can truly optimize it. Sure. And so as we think of our decision making, we have to look at it the same way. Otherwise, we're going to continue to rob Peter to pay Paul, if you will, right? And so that's probably the biggest one I can think of. And, I'd couple that, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but while we're all maybe somewhat still hesitant in a sense, but harnessing the power of AI, finding truly real use cases for AI and building that into the process of how we take decisions to be smarter, to be faster, to be more resilient. We're never going to hit the objectives that are going to be put in front of us, the challenges that are going to be put in front of us in 2025 if we don't do that.
Absolutely. Now, before you go, little birdie has told me that I'd like you to help me celebrate something, because I believe we've got a very big milestone for somebody on this show.
Oh, please don't ask me to sing.
No, we're not going to sing. Don't worry. Nobody wants to hear me sing either. But I just want to say a big happy 50th birthday to MVK today. You're joining us on this show from Dubai, and we just want to celebrate with you before we let you.
Happy birthday, MVK.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels like I'm in the 5th inning. Does that make sense? I feel like it feels like I'm halfway there. But no, thank you guys. And yeah, I mean, it's a big milestone. I'll celebrate with my family. We're gonna be off to Brazil soon, where we celebrate our holidays. But yeah, so let's celebrate. But no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, Dean, thank you so much for joining us
Thanks
today.
For having me.
Sharing all of those great insights. You shared some actionable takeaways too, which is awesome. But now we're going to let you go because it's time for trivia. Eddie, we've got a big question for everybody.
Yes.
What are we giving away? Can you tell everybody what we're giving away?
Why don't you share what we're giving away?
Well, as always, we've already given away a couple of sets, but we know like there is like millions and millions of people playing pickleball across the world, I think. It's very big in North America. And so we are giving away a pickleball set to the winner of our question. Now, the question that we have for you, which one of these characteristics is not essential to building an adaptive supply chain? And so your options are A, anti-fragility, B, integration, C, dinosaurization, and D, optimization. So MVK, without giving away the answer, do you have any clues that you can give to our audience?
Well, let's just say that we have to realize that we have to change things, and that's the only way. Change is the only constant, I guess, in business, and so yeah, that's maybe a little bit of a giveaway. I don't know if it is really, but
well, I think mine might be a little bit more of the giveaway, my hint, because I'm going to give everybody a hint. And remember, we're going to announce the winner after we end the show. So make sure to put your answers in the comments right now, because whoever weighs in with the correct answer the fastest is going to win this pickleball set. So my hint is Land Before Time. I don't know if you're my age, you know that movie. And I think that might have given it away.
I think you thought about the answer. She's not entirely fair. You actually didn't. You didn't like. So you're asking me a question. You knew the answer, and so I was like, "How do I do that without giving it away?" I'm so bad at that. So like, thank you. Case in point. Creativity goes to Sarah.
All good. Well, if you want to learn more and keep learning about adaptive supply chains, go to Koopa.com. Make sure to check that out and join us in the new year for another episode of On the Margins. MVK, happy holidays. I want to say happy holidays to our audience as well. Everybody have a safe and fun holiday season. Thanks for joining us.
Happy holidays, everybody. Cheers.